"Captain! Captain, can you hear me?" The woman's voice shook the silent cockpit, but the man in the white uniform didn't move. His head leaned against the side of the seat, the gold stripes on his shoulder catching the cold light from the instrument panel. Outside the windshield, endless blue sky stretched across the horizon, calm and indifferent. Inside the cockpit, every alarm felt louder than it should have been. The aircraft hummed steadily at 35,000 feet, a machine designed to obey commands. But the one person responsible for those commands had collapsed. The woman standing in the cockpit doorway tightened her grip on the seat in front of her. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not now, not ever. Yet the moment she saw the captain slump forward moments earlier, something instinctive inside her pushed past hesitation and straight into action. The radio crackled with distant voices from air traffic control, unaware that the situation in the cockpit had just changed in a way none of them expected. Her eyes moved across the flight displays, absorbing numbers and indicators faster than someone with no business being in that cockpit should have. Then she whispered a name under her breath, almost like a memory rising from somewhere buried deep. "Falcon." Her voice was so quiet it barely existed in the air, but the moment felt heavier than the altitude itself. 8 years earlier, that name had been spoken for the last time. 8 years earlier, a woman carrying that call sign had been officially declared dead. Before this story goes any further, take a second to subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard. The young woman stepped further into the cockpit, her navy blue blouse catching the light as she leaned forward over the central console. She glanced once more at the unconscious captain, then out toward the endless sky. Somewhere far below, people lived ordinary lives. Somewhere far away, fighter pilots trained in silence. And somewhere, buried deep in official records, one name still carried a line that read, "Deceased." The woman exhaled slowly. "Control, this is..." She hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second, like someone stepping across a line they once promised never to cross again. "This is Falcon, requesting control." Thousands of miles away, inside a command room where radar screens never slept, two fighter pilots froze the moment the word reached their headsets, because the call sign they had just heard belonged to a ghost, and ghosts weren't supposed to fly airplanes. The cockpit of Flight 271 felt smaller than it had a few minutes earlier. The air seemed heavier, filled with the quiet tension that appears when something unexpected forces ordinary people into extraordinary moments. The woman stood between the two pilot seats now. One hand braced against the back of the chair while the other hovered uncertainly near the control panel. The captain remained motionless, his breathing shallow but steady, his head tilted toward the window as if he had simply fallen asleep during a routine flight. Except nothing about the situation was routine anymore. The autopilot held the aircraft steady, keeping it level above a sea of clouds glowing under afternoon sunlight. The screens displayed altitude, heading, fuel levels, all the numbers that kept modern aviation running with mathematical precision. But behind those numbers was a fragile truth: machines only followed instructions, and at that moment no one qualified was giving them. The woman swallowed slowly, forcing herself to stay calm. Her reflection flickered faintly in the glass of the flight display. She barely recognized the person staring back. 8 years was a long time to disappear from the world. Long enough for people to move on. Long enough for files to be closed and memorials to be written. Yet here she was again, standing in the exact environment she had once sworn never to return to. She glanced at the captain again, checking his pulse the way memory told her to. It was there, weak but present. "You picked a bad time to check out," she murmured under her breath, her voice carrying a strange mix of frustration and concern. The truth was, she didn't hate the man. He was just another professional, caught in a moment his body hadn't warned him about. A few hours earlier, she had been sitting quietly in seat 14A, just another passenger staring out the window while pretending the sky didn't bring back memories she'd spent years burying. The flight attendants had passed by with coffee and polite smiles. No one noticed the way her eyes instinctively tracked the aircraft's attitude during turbulence. No one noticed the way she counted seconds between engine pitch changes. Old habits rarely disappeared. They simply hid in the background, waiting. And then the cockpit door opened earlier when a concerned attendant had rushed forward after the captain stopped responding. That was the moment everything changed. The woman hadn't planned to move, but the moment she saw the control panels, something inside her shifted from passenger to something else entirely. Training never truly vanished. It lived quietly inside muscle memory. Now the radio crackled again. Flight 271 confirmed status. The voice from air traffic control sounded calm but curious, the way professionals always sounded when something unusual appeared on their screens. The woman stared at the radio switch. 1,000 consequences waited behind that single button. 8 years earlier, her name had been removed from flight rosters forever. 8 years earlier, investigators had written reports explaining why Falcon never came back from a classified mission. She had read those reports herself once, long after the world stopped looking for her. Her fingers hovered over the transmitter. Outside the windshield, sunlight reflected off distant clouds like waves on a frozen ocean. She could still walk away. She could step back into the cabin and pretend she never saw the cockpit. Someone else would eventually handle the situation. But deep inside, another voice reminded her of something she had learned during training many years ago. Responsibility rarely waits for permission. Her thumb pressed the radio button. "Control, this is Flight 271 cockpit." She paused again before adding quietly, "Captain is unconscious. Aircraft stable on autopilot." The radio went silent for 2 seconds that felt much longer. Then the controller's voice returned, slightly sharper now. "Flight 271, confirm the captain is incapacitated." The woman nodded to herself, even though no one could see her. "Confirmed." She didn't add anything else yet, because she knew the next question would arrive soon. Who exactly was speaking? And that question had an answer the world believed was impossible. Several thousand miles away, the radar room at a coastal air defense command center hummed with quiet concentration. Rows of screens displayed aircraft moving across digital maps like silent chess pieces. Controllers watched everything from commercial flights to military patrols, their eyes trained to recognize patterns long before problems appeared. 2 fighter pilots sat nearby reviewing routine flight data, their helmets resting beside them on the desk. They were veterans of countless missions, men who had spent years trusting their instincts more than their comfort. One of them leaned back slightly in his chair when a transmission from Flight 271 passed through the communication network. At first, it sounded like any other in-flight report, but then a single word slipped through the audio feed. "Falcon." The pilot's posture changed instantly. "Play that again," he said quietly. The technician rewound the recording. The voice came through the speakers once more, steady but unmistakably tense. "This is Falcon, requesting control." Tightening, as if he had just heard a ghost whisper his name. "That's not possible," he muttered. Falcon wasn't just a random call sign. It belonged to someone who had vanished 8 years earlier during a classified operation over international waters. Official reports described the incident as a catastrophic aircraft failure. Debris had been found, signals had disappeared, and the pilot assigned to that call sign had been declared dead after months of investigation. Memorial services had been held. Families had grieved, and yet the voice echoing through the recording sounded disturbingly real. Back in the cockpit of Flight 271, the woman stood motionless after transmitting the message. She knew what might be happening on the other side of that signal. Somewhere, someone was probably replaying her voice right now, trying to decide whether the impossible had just happened. She glanced again at the unconscious captain. The aircraft continued gliding smoothly through the sky, unaware that the people responsible for guiding it were now part of a mystery larger than a medical emergency. The woman's heart beat faster, but her movements stayed controlled. She adjusted the captain's seat slightly, making sure he remained stable. Then she studied the instrument panel again. Fuel levels looked safe. Weather radar showed clear skies ahead. But the radio remained quiet longer than expected. And silence in aviation usually meant people were thinking very carefully about their next words. Finally, the speaker crackled. "Flight 271 cockpit. Identify the individual transmitting." The woman closed her eyes briefly. 8 years of hiding had taught her how to avoid questions. But this was different. 35,000 feet above the earth, truth had a way of demanding its place. She pressed the radio again. "This is Falcon." The name felt heavier the second time she said it. On the ground, the two fighter pilots exchanged a look neither of them had prepared for. One of them whispered almost to himself, "If that's really her." The other pilot stood up slowly, already reaching for his helmet, because somewhere above the clouds, a commercial aircraft now carried a voice that history insisted no longer existed. And if Falcon was truly back in the sky, the world was about to learn that some stories refused to end when people expected them to. The cockpit of Flight 271 fell into a strange kind of silence after the second transmission. Not the peaceful silence of a smooth flight, but the kind that felt like the air itself was holding its breath. The woman kept her hand near the controls, her eyes moving from one instrument to another with quiet precision. Every screen in front of her carried a language she once knew better than her own thoughts. Altitude steady, fuel stable, heading consistent. The aircraft was behaving exactly as it should. Yet the tension in her chest refused to settle. Because flying a plane wasn't only about the machine, it was about the invisible network of people connected to it. Controllers, pilots, systems, all trusting the voice on the radio to be exactly who they expected. And right now, she was not someone anyone expected to hear from again. A faint beep from the console reminded her that time was moving whether she was ready or not. She leaned slightly closer to the unconscious captain, checking his breathing again. Still steady, still alive. That small reassurance helped her focus. Years earlier, during training flights that began before sunrise and ended long after sunset, she had learned something instructors repeated constantly. Panic was contagious, but calm was contagious too. The aircraft followed logic, not fear. So she forced herself to breathe slowly and think the way she used to, one problem at a time. The radio suddenly came alive again, but the voice was different this time. It carried the firm tone of someone who wasn't just curious anymore. Flight 271 maintained current heading and altitude. Additional assistance is being coordinated. The woman understood what that meant without needing clarification. Somewhere out there, fighter jets were probably being prepared to meet the aircraft. Standard safety procedure. But there was something else hidden in the pause before the controller spoke again. Hesitation, the kind that only appeared when a situation didn't fit the rules written in manuals. She rested both hands lightly on the console, letting the familiar shape of the controls steady her thoughts. 8 years ago, she had lived inside a world where decisions were made in seconds and hesitation could cost lives. Then everything ended in a single mission the public never heard about. The ocean swallowed the aircraft. Radar signals vanished. Official reports declared the pilot gone forever. But the truth was far more complicated than the reports ever revealed. Her eyes drifted briefly toward the clouds outside the windshield. The sunlight across the horizon looked almost identical to the sky she remembered from that final mission. For a moment, the memory tried to pull her backward into a place she had spent years avoiding. Metal shaking violently, warning lights flashing red across the cockpit, a radio screaming static where voices should have been. The moment when survival stopped feeling like a certainty and started feeling like a miracle. She forced the memory away. This flight was different. This moment wasn't about the past, it was about responsibility. The intercom behind her suddenly clicked on, and a nervous flight attendant's voice filtered into the cockpit. "Ma'am, the passengers are starting to notice something's wrong. Are we okay?" The woman turned slightly toward the doorway, her expression softening just enough to calm the fear she heard in that voice. "We're stable," she replied gently. "The captain just needs medical help. Tell everyone to stay seated and calm. We're working on it." The attendant hesitated before answering, as if trying to decide whether to ask another question, but then she simply said, "Okay," and the intercom clicked off again. The woman leaned back for a moment, letting the quiet return. Her mind moved quickly now, calculating possibilities. If fighter aircraft were being dispatched, they would arrive within minutes. Those pilots would confirm the aircraft's situation visually before guiding it toward the safest landing option. It was standard protocol. But what wasn't standard was the identity of the person sitting in the cockpit right now. She wondered if the pilots being scrambled already knew the name she had spoken. If they did, their reactions would probably look exactly like the ones happening inside the command center earlier. Shock first, then disbelief, then questions no one had answers for yet. The radio clicked again. This time the voice sounded almost careful. Flight 271, 2 aircraft will be approaching your position shortly. They will maintain escort distance. She nodded even though the controller couldn't see it. Understood. Several minutes passed with nothing but the low hum of engines and the soft glow of the instrument panels. Then, far in the distance outside the windshield, 2 small shapes appeared against the blue horizon. At first they were only dark specks cutting through the sky, but as they grew closer the sleek outlines became unmistakable. Fighter jets, fast, silent, controlled power moving through the air like arrows. The woman watched them approach with an expression that carried more memory than fear. Because she knew those aircraft, she had once flown among them, sharing the same sky and the same discipline that turned ordinary people into professionals capable of impossible calm. One of the jets slowly moved closer to the left side of the commercial plane, keeping a respectful distance while matching speed perfectly. The sunlight reflected across its sharp wings, as if announcing its presence. Inside the cockpit, the woman exhaled slowly. "Right on time," she whispered. A new voice suddenly came through the radio, deeper and more familiar with the rhythm of military communication. "Flight 271, this is escort leader." There was a pause before the next words arrived, almost as if the pilot on the other side was choosing them very carefully. "Confirm your call sign." The woman stared straight ahead at the horizon for a moment. 8 years had passed since she last answered that question. 8 years since the sky itself had heard the name spoken by her voice. She pressed the transmitter again. "Falcon!" The radio remained silent for 2 long seconds. Then the escort pilot spoke again, but his voice carried something new now. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. The kind that happens when truth finally reaches someone who has been waiting without realizing it. "Copy that, Falcon." The woman felt something shift quietly inside her chest when she heard the acknowledgement. Not relief exactly, something deeper than that. For years she had lived in a world where her past existed only as a memory inside her own mind. But now the sky itself had heard her again, and the sky remembered. The 2 fighter jets maintained their position beside the aircraft as the commercial plane continued forward through the open blue. For the passengers in the cabin, the sight outside the windows probably looked strange but reassuring. For the controllers on the ground, it meant the situation was finally under careful watch. And for the woman in the cockpit, it meant the moment she could no longer hide from her past had officially arrived. She glanced once more at the unconscious captain. Help would come soon. Medical teams, investigators, questions. But none of that mattered as much as the simple fact that the plane remained steady, the passengers remained safe, and the sky had once again become a place where courage mattered more than history. Because sometimes life places ordinary people in moments where fear feels louder than confidence. Yet the real difference between chaos and control often comes down to one quiet decision: to step forward when others step back. And if there's one thing this moment proves, it's that strength isn't about never disappearing or never failing. Real strength is about standing up again when the world already decided your story was over.